This Parsha podcast is dedicated in loving memory and Lila Nishmas Javaher Bat Raphael, who recently passed away at the age of nearly 100. May her soul be elevated in heaven. It's Parshas Terumah, and this is where the students of Torah bifurcate. Where are the stories? Where's the drama? Where's the narrative? All I'm reading about is about the tabernacle and the vessels and the vestments of the high priest. And I always like to tell y'all each year that when I was younger, I didn't really appreciate these sections in the Torah. Wake me up when Leviticus ends. The tabernacle and all the vessels, the ark and the table and the menorah and the inner altar and the outer altar and all the curtains and the hooks and the various different garments of the high priest. And then we have a whole book of sacrifices, purity and impurity. Some people think it's very technical. It's very dry. And they crave and they yearn for the stories and the drama and the interactions. But of course, we have grown to learn that it is enormously rich with insight and profundity, as is true with every part of the Torah. There isn't a single letter of Torah that's not bursting with meaning and with insight. And of course, it's very cheerful for us. This time of year, we always schedule our fundraiser around this time of year. And this Parsha starts off with a fundraiser. So I always tell my colleagues at the Torch Center, we gotta wait. We gotta wait to Parsha's Terumah. There's a fundraising drive. And it's not a coincidence when we time our fundraising drive to this time of year. It's not quite this week. Please, that'll be next week. But this is a propitious time to fundraise. They did it in only 2 days. We used to have a 2-day fundraiser like the fundraiser in our Parsha. Now it takes a couple more days, but the concept is similar. We do one fundraiser where we ask our friends and listeners to join us in keeping the bright flame of Torch and the Torch Center lit in 2025. That's going to happen next week, but it is noteworthy, and it's not a coincidence that we try to time it towards the part of the Torah talk about the donations that were given to the tabernacle. So that's the Parsha starts off. Moshe is instructed to seek donors for 15 different raw materials: gold, silver, and copper, 3 different types of wool, and then there's linen and goat hair and reddened goat skin and hide from a mysterious animal called a tachash, special shittim wood, various oils and spices, and various precious stones. And the purpose of this is to build a tabernacle, is to build a sanctuary for God to dwell in. The Midrash tells us that after the Almighty gave us his Torah, he cannot be separated from his Torah. And he asked us, now the bearers of the Holy Torah, to make him a little place, a little domicile in which he can dwell. Well, what does this look like? That's the whole Parsha. I talked about the various different vessels that are inside the tabernacle, and then the actual structure of the tabernacle. And what I wanted to do in this very special edition of the Parsha podcast is to kind of sample some of the amazing ideas of the first 3 vessels that we're told about in our Parsha. The first vessel, the vessel that kickstarts the entire tabernacle build out, the vessel that is emblematic of the goal of the tabernacle, is, of course, the ark. The ark is made out of gold, but it's actually wood covered, plated inside and out with gold. It's really 3 different nested boxes. You have a golden box, and in the golden box you put a bottomless wooden box, and then you cover it with a second golden box, and inside that inner gold box you place the tablets of testimony, and the shards, the broken shards of the first set of tablets that Moshe shattered after he came down from the mountain, and he saw the revelry and the jubilation of the golden calf. He took the first set of tablets and he shattered them. Those shards are placed in the ark together with the second set of tablets that Moshe received after the nation was forgiven. Now the ark is wreathed by a golden crown, and there's a cover that goes on top of it, and that is a gold-hewn cherub canopied cover. And then on the four corners there are golden rings in which two gold-plated wooden poles are placed for transport. Now the ark is symbolic of Torah. And not just Torah, study as an intellectual pursuit, as a discipline of sorts, rather the close relationship that Torah study creates between the student of Torah and the giver of Torah, Almighty God. There are 3 vessels in the tabernacle that have crowns. The crown that wreaths the ark is symbolic of the crown of Torah. And unlike the other 2 crowned vessels, the table, which is symbolic of the monarchy, that crown is inaccessible because the monarchy is only for David and his descendants. And the crown of the golden altar, that is symbolic of the crown of priesthood, that is also inaccessible unless you are Aaron or Aaron's descendants. The 3rd crown, the greatest crown of them all, is the crown of the ark, the crown of Torah, that is available for anyone who wants to grab it. Now, I want to share a selection of ideas on our Parsha and on the first 3 vessels. And we'll start off with a fun one. A fun one, a little bit of calculation, but that's okay. The ark is symbolic of Torah. The ark is symbolic of the student of Torah, the bearer of Torah. Moshe is like the greatest art that there was. He housed within him, just as the ark did, he housed within him the Torah. And the Talmud tells us that the ark was gold inside and outside. And that is not by chance, because a Torah student, a Torah scholar, must be golden inside and golden outside. Some people can be externally golden. They can project a golden personality outwardly. They could pretend to be righteous and elevated and golden. But inside, they can be rotten. And no one knows about that because no one knows what's happening on their insides. A great Torah sage must be like the ark. Even the parts of them that are hidden, that no one else sees, that are covered, that are canopied over by the golden cover, they too internally must be golden. The Talmud tells us in the book of Yoma on page 72b that just as the ark inside and out is gold, a Torah scholar who wants to be a true Torah scholar must be golden inside and outside. Let's proceed with another very powerful idea. If you were to ask me what to do with the shattered parts of the tablets, they remind us of the golden calf, of that terrible incident that mars our history. What do we do with those shards? Maybe we should get rid of them. Should we bury it? Should we burn it? Should we eliminate it? Should we completely banish any remnant, any memory of that event? We would think maybe yes. These symbolize a very low point that our nation reached. But no, those shards are placed inside the ark, together with the other set of tablets that were pristine and not broken. I think this is a very powerful idea for us humans, maybe not for angels. Angels, they could skip this idea. But us humans, we have to remember, we're humans. We're flawed. We're fallible. We have ups and downs. We have days of love and days of hatred, days of ascent and days of what seems like a spiraling fall into the abyss. There are days where we're pristine. We're like angels. We can ascend to heaven, be worthy of tablets, etched, engraved by the finger of God. And there are days that it's like a golden calf. What happened? How did we fall so low? And that is just the state of humanity. Even someone who's trying to ascend, there's going to be ups and downs. The general trajectory hopefully is ascendant. But if you zoom in, there may be dips. There may be low points. There may be nadirs along the general ascent. We don't need to be embarrassed about that. And in fact, those failures, once we're done, once our story has been told, once our legacy has been forged, those failures are actually ultimately part of our successes. We're humans. We're not angels. And the way we ascend, it's a rocky road. It's a bumpy road. It's not smooth sailing. We have to remember that. The shards, those terrible shards, or those beautiful shards that would have been incredible, but alas, they were shattered. That too, ultimately, is part of the end result, the glorious end result. And they too are installed in the ark. The ark was miraculous. The Talmud tells us that it didn't take up any space. The place of the aron of the ark, eino min hamida. It's not part of the calculation. If you were to go into the Holy of Holies, it's 20, once it's the permanent temple, that is. Same thing in the Tabernacle on a smaller scale. In the center of the Holy of Holies is the ark. And if you were to measure from one end of the ark to the wall, it will be almost 10 cubits. You go to the other end of the ark and you measure to the other wall, it too is 10 cubits. The room is only 20 cubits wide, 20 cubits long, 20 by 20, but somehow the ark itself does not take up any space. Now, this is a nice little neat miracle, but there's something very profound about it. It reveals to us what the essence of the ark is and really what the essence of Torah is. We have similar miracles in concentric levels going outside of the ark. So we have the land of Israel. That's like the whole land itself. It's what? Millions of acres? 8,000 square miles or so, depending on exactly where you make the borders. We're told that this land is called the land of the deer. The amount of people and things you could fit into this land, it's like a deer. What does that mean? So they just tell us that if you were to skin a deer, you have to be braver than me to do that. If you were to skin a deer, and then you want to take the skin and put it back on the deer, you just can't do it. The skin of the deer really is not big enough to house all the insides of the deer. It stretches in ways that we cannot explain. Land of Israel is the land of the deer. It stretches and it is able to incorporate within it more than it should. You get to the city of Jerusalem. The Mishnah tells us that there was never a person who came to Jerusalem and wanted a place to stay, and there was no room for them. No place to sleep. Go elsewhere. The city of Jerusalem was able to house, no matter how many people came, it's always able to house even one more person. Same sort of idea. It could fit more than you would expect. And then you get further in, more into the next concentric circle, the temple itself. The temple itself, when they were there on Yom Kippur, and the festivals, it was packed. The whole nation. It's a large complex, but it's still not large enough. Everyone is just packed body to body, cramped. A nightmare for us who get claustrophobic. Where's the exit? But when it was time to prostrate, to bow down before God, they would prostrate and it would be spacious. A miracle. There's more room than there really should be. The ark doesn't take up space. In the epicenter where heaven and earth touch, in the Holy of Holies, it's this miracle where there's something that's there that really doesn't take up any space. It is from a different dimension. As you get closer and closer and closer to heaven, to the touch point of heaven and earth, you unravel the rigid rules of physics. The rules of nature just don't apply. When we pray, we're praying to God. What does that mean? I'm saying words, but this is creating a spiritual reality. I say, just tell us, every prayer has to travel. Wherever you may be praying, you could be in the Torch Center in Houston, Texas, and you launch a prayer. The prayer does not go directly up to heaven. It first must travel all the way to Jerusalem, to the land of Israel, to Jerusalem, to the temple, to Temple Mount, to the Holy of Holies. That's the portal where heaven and earth meet. And that's why as you get closer, the rules of nature seem to be altered. Now, in a recent podcast that I recorded on my Jewish History podcast channel, I spoke about the current whereabouts of the ark, the original ark. And the Talmud itself discusses where was the ark? It wasn't there in the Second Temple era. Well, where was it placed? Was it taken? Was it hidden? And the first opinion that the Talmud cites is that the ark never moved. It's exactly where it always was, in the Holy of Holies. Now you read that, you're like, wait a minute, people have been there. They've taken GoPros and walked in. I don't see it. And you could feel around and not see it. Now it's prohibited for us Jews to go there unless we are ritually pure. And even then, there's certain parts that we're not allowed to walk. But if you send in a drone and you examine every single corner, it's not there. And the Talmud says, well, it is there. It is on a different dimension. And unless you have the tools to interface with that dimension, it will be totally invisible to you. Remember, the ark did not take up any place in the Holy of Holies. Well, where was it? It was there, but it was there on a different dimension, in a different set of rules. And according to the first opinion of the Talmud, it's still there. But you have to have the worthiness to be able to interface with that world. And this reminds us of Abraham's trek to Mount Moriah. He travels with his two lads in addition to Isaac. Those two lads are Ishmael and Eliezer. And after 3 days of traveling, they get to the mountain. And Exodus tells what happened. Abraham sees the cloud hovering above the mountain. And he asks his companions, well, you see what I see? And Isaac says, yeah, sure, I see it. Ishmael, I see nothing. Eliezer, I see nothing. It's right there. Only someone who has the proper tools, the proper implements, can see it. It's from that other dimension. You have to be a citizen of that dimension to be able to interface with it. Moshe's burial spot. No one knows where it is. That's what the verse in the Torah tells us. The Talmud tells us that if you were to go to this mountain and you are examining the mountain, at the bottom of the mountain, it looks like it's at the top. You climb to the top, it looks like it's at the bottom. There's no way to see it. Why not? It is like the ark. Moshe embodies the ark. He's from a different dimension. Moshe has all the Torah within him as the ark houses the tablets. It's from that other dimension. And as a result, unless you are qualified, it's invisible to you. I always think, the garden. The garden that Adam spent some time in before he was booted, before he was evicted. Where is that garden? It's supposed to be somewhere in this world. How come we don't know where it is? Only someone who is worthy of interfacing with the intensity of that spiritual world can even see it. The ark housed the Torah. Where did the Torah come from? It came from heaven. And its holiness is yet still rooted in heaven. It is still supernatural. But it's possible for someone to be a professor who studies Scripture and Old Testament. Quote unquote, we don't use that term, of course. Or even a professor of Talmud. And they're well versed, and they're intelligent, and they're sharp, and they learned Aramaic, high IQ, but they have no idea about Torah. They're not crowned with the crown of the ark, and they have no interface with Almighty God. Why? Because part of this experience is, when you study Torah, you have to realize what you're doing. You're taking a little trip to the other world, to the other realm, to the other dimension. On top of the ark were two cherubs. And these cherubs represent, one of them is us and one of them is God. And they would swivel. How do we know that they would swivel? Because one verse tells us that they would face away from each other. And one verse says they would face each other. Which is it? Well, they're both true. When the nation is righteous, when they turn towards God, so to speak, God turns towards them. When they turn away from God, well, God reciprocates their sentiment. When we turn to Torah, we say we want a connection with Almighty God via His Torah, then He turns to us. And then what we're able to receive is the actual power of Torah. The true meaning of this ark. And maybe even get a little crown for ourselves. It's possible to study Torah and have no touch point with that other dimension. And to be like Ishmael and Eliezer, you're there, but you are completely oblivious to the cloud hovering over the mountain. Some ideas on the ark. Let's proceed to the table. The table was also made of gold and also adorned with a golden crown and affixed with poles. Unlike the poles of the ark that were prohibited to be removed, you can remove the poles, the staves of the table. And atop the table were dishes. And in the dishes were showbreads, lechem hapanim. They were baked and placed there for a week. And at the end of the week, they were given to the cohort of Kohanim, of priests, that were overseeing the temple during that week. Now these breads, they're called breads, but actually they were kosher for Passover, which is a nice little bit of trivia to know. 12 breads, and they were massive. Each loaf of bread was about 3 feet long and 1.5 feet wide and 1/2 foot tall. And it was shaped like a boat with like the walls going vertical. And there were 2 stacks of 6 apiece with 2 spoons of frankincense on the table between the 2 stacks. Now these breads were baked each Friday, and they were eaten 8 days later, because they were baked and then they were placed on Shabbos in the slots. The table must always have bread in it, so you would actually take the new bread and you would push it. You would like kind of slide the old bread, so to speak, the 8-day-old bread off of that particular slot, and you replace all 12, and then those 8-day-old breads would be eaten by the Kohanim of the cohort of that week. But there was a miracle. The ark had miracles. The table had miracles. They maintained their freshness. They were as fresh when they were removed from the table and eaten by that wheat's cohort, they were as fresh and as steamy as if they were just baked, just taken out of the oven. Now, the location of the table, it was in the sanctuary. So unless you were a Kohen, you can never walk in there. But during the festivals, the Talmud tells us that the showbreads were lifted up so everyone could see them. And everyone could witness, even though it's been a week old, it's still steaming. It is still very hot and fresh. Now, what's the insight? What's the secret behind this miracle? There's something very profound over here. Why does bread deteriorate? Well, everything really deteriorates. Everything atrophies. Everyone wants the elixir of life. Everyone wants to live forever, or some people do. But we cannot live forever, ever since the sin of Adam. Since the sin of Adam, there was a decree. Humanity was condemned to die, but not just humanity. The rules of this world were affixed to be such that there is entropy. There is a breakdown of things. Things do not last forever. Some things last for a long time, but eventually everything comes apart. Even a big tree could be 1,000 years old. Eventually, it too will come apart. That's just a fixture of the world ever since Adam's sin. Good and bad are now mixed together. And therefore, nothing is completely good. It must have some drop of bad. And that will ultimately condemn that thing to be destroyed. Those rules don't apply in the temple. It's from that other dimension. You place the bread, you leave it there for 8 days. There's no badness that encroaches upon the bread. So yes, you leave your food out for a couple of days. Your bagels are stale and no longer as exciting and sumptuous as they were when they were baked. When you go to the store, you're like, I don't want that pie of pizza. Give me a fresh one. Give me a fresh one. Well, that's the reality today, not in the temple. Now, there's something very profound that we learn about these showbreads. In the book of Leviticus, we're going to read about a guy who blasphemed. We don't really know his name. He blasphemed. And he was executed for being a blasphemer. And our sages try to figure out, well, what prompted him to do this? Where did he go wrong? And it offers a variety of opinions. And one of the opinions says that he had a problem with the showbreads. And he said, it's just not befitting the temple and what we're offering to God. It should be like old, crusty bread. He ridiculed the showbreads by saying, why are we feeding God 9-day-old bread? Now, of course, God never ate it, so to speak. It was eaten by the priests. But the merits of his argument are off. We know, Talmud tells us. We mentioned the Talmud. It was steamy hot, even a week and change after it was baked. So what's going on? And this is a famous question, and this is a very famous answer by one of the Hasidic masters. He says something very profound. Yes, it is true that just as the ark, it was part of the other dimension. It's basically something that's from heaven. It should be in heaven. It's housing the tablets that came from heaven. It's here, but it's still heavenly. And therefore doesn't operate by the rules of our world. Tables like that as well. But if you wanted to see the ark, you can't see it. You have to have some foothold in the other world. Table is also heavenly. It's also not subject to the rules instituted thanks to the sin of Adam. But you have to have some foothold in that pre-sin of Adam world in order to appreciate it. So when the blasphemer, when he saw the showbreads, it looked moldy. It was old. It was crusty. It was unappealing because he was not able to appreciate that other dimension. When it was lifted up and shown to everyone, only those that had some sort of beachhead of the world before Adam's sin, who had worked to try to undo the ill effects of Adam's sin, only they were able to appreciate the transcendental and supernatural and primordial quality of the showbreads that were not impacted by the sin of Adam. When the blasphemer saw it, he had no foothold in that world. And that's why he was able to make that claim and say, what's up with that? Why are we serving God? Even though that's not true. But why do we have in the temple old, crusty bread? To him, it was all invisible. He did not live up to that value and was able to experience those miracles. And let's move on to the menorah. So we have the ark, we have the table, we have the menorah, which of course is a candelabra hewn from a single block of gold. And it had 7 intricately embellished branches. And there's a very interesting curiosity about the menorah. Even though the Parsha dedicates 10 verses to describe how the menorah is made, and the buttons and the knobs and the flowers, Moshe did not understand it. And there's 2 very interesting things that our sages tell us about Moshe's inability to take the words of the menorah and translate that into the actual craftsmanship of the menorah. It tells us, this is based on verse 40, to make the menorah as you are shown on the mountain. Now, what does that mean? Rashi tells us that Moshe had a hard time visualizing the menorah. So the Almighty projected the image of the menorah on the mountain. But Moshe still had a hard time producing this menorah. And God said to him, the menorah will be made. And this is based upon the verse in verse 31. The menorah will be made, meaning you won't make it. It's like the passive voice, right? It doesn't say that you'll make it. It says that it will be made. Well, how was it made? God told Moshe, take this big block of gold and throw it into the fire, and it will be made on its own. And indeed, that's how the menorah was made. So 2 very interesting descriptions of what happened here with the construction of the menorah. It contained all sorts of intricate embellishments, and it had to be hewn out of a single block of gold. And the artisans and craftsmen that were commissioned to construct the tabernacle and its vessels, and even Moshe, they struggled with the task. So God projected an image of a menorah made of fire onto the mountain. Well, Moshe saw it, but Moshe still struggled. Notwithstanding the visual aid, Moshe was unable to produce said menorah. So God said to Moshe, no problem. Take the gold and throw it into the fire. And Moshe threw the gold into the fire, and out came the menorah. It was made on its own. But here's the question. Once we know that ultimately Moshe was not able to make this, the ultimate manufacturing of the menorah was by making a fire and throwing it into the fire, and out came the menorah. which happens to be suspiciously similar to the way the golden calf was made, which is a separate discussion. We talked about that in previous years. But if that's the way it's going to be made, God should tell Moshe, menorah is too complicated. Just here's a fire, put it in. That's not what happens. We have 10 verses describing exactly what the menorah has to look like. Go make it. Moshe's like, I can't make it. I don't know. What does it look like? How is it supposed to actually appear? Okay, here's a visual aid. Here's the menorah projected upon the mountain. And Moshe still struggles. And then, and only then, does God provide the way to actually do it. Put the gold in the fire. Out will come the menorah. This could all be simplified. Some things are beyond human capacity. And I will add, we have to train ourselves to realize that Moshe didn't have a problem with the physical making of the menorah. Most certainly, Moshe was able to make the menorah physically. It seems like what Moshe struggled with is the deeper symbolism and meaning behind the menorah. This wasn't a problem of craftsmanship. Side point. There's a very profound answer given to us by one of the great Hasidic masters, who incidentally is the father of the previous Hasidic master who told us about the bread being steamy only to those who had a foothold in heaven. This comes from the great Sfas Emes. That name, it may not ring your bell, but one of the greatest of the Hasidic masters of all time. He says an idea. For any initiative to succeed, you will have to have at the onset some sort of picture, some sort of visualization of what the end will look like. If Moshe was not told what the menorah looked like, he was not shown what the menorah looked like, there's no way that anything he could have done or contributed to doing would result in the menorah. And yes, the menorah was made with miracles. But even miracles will only happen if the miracle maker, so to speak, the vessel of that miracle has an image, has a picture, has a sense of what miracle we're looking for. So to me, this is a very powerful reframing of miracles, and certainly of anything we want to do, because anything we want to do is really a miracle, right? Because what can we do? We're nothing. We can't do anything on our own. It's only because God is helping us that we can achieve anything. You have to know what you want. You have to visualize what you want. You have to have an understanding of what you want, and then you can be a vessel for a miracle. And I want to share my favorite story about this idea. About a Rabbi Wosner, one of the great halachic authorities of the last 100 years. Rabbi Shmuel Wosner passed away in 2015 at the age of 102, which is commonplace. Amongst the great Torah sages, they're 100 plus, and they're still sharp as a tack. They're still writing these incredible halachic articles and still able to answer questions. Unbelievable. The story goes that he was in the last months of his life, and he had an attendant to help him with some tasks that he couldn't do due to his advanced age. And it was before Pesach, was almost Passover, and you have to inspect the house for chametz. Any crumbs, any leavened bread, or any derivative of leavened bread, you got to inspect it. And that means you got to go through every nook and cranny and open up every drawer and cabinet and go through every part of the house to inspect. And this young attendant noticed something in one of the drawers that was very surprising. He found literature authored by the great rabbi. But not authored like in the 2010s or the 1970s or even the 1950s. Authored in the 1930s. He does the math. Well, the rabbi at the time is, 16, 17, 18 years old? He's young. But he has these very long and complicated halachic essays that he's writing, responsa that he's writing. There's a whole class of literature called rabbinic responsa. You write a question to the great sage, and the sage will answer your question and prove his case. So this attendant finds in the drawers of the great rabbi these very old halachic essays authored by this sage from a very long time ago. And the surprising thing about it is that the sage signs his name Chief Rabbi of the city of Lodz. Now, that name may not be familiar, but that was the second largest Jewish city in Poland. A city that had 400,000 Jewish residents. And he was a teenager at the time. He was the chief rabbi of the city of Lodz. She's like, wait, what's going on? Like, what does this mean? And then he's like, well, maybe he had a grandfather or a great uncle of the same name, but this is the same handwriting. What's going on? So he musters up the gumption and asks the rabbi himself, who's now over 100 years old. And he told him that at the time, he was a student in the great yeshiva Chachmei Lublin, which is one of the greatest yeshivos in the world at the time. And it had a very special cadre of absolute Torah geniuses from Europe. There were students there who knew all of Talmud by heart, literally. I have an uncle of mine, Rabbi Kreisworth, who was the chief rabbi of Antwerp. He was a student in that yeshiva. And he literally knew all of Talmud by heart. Not only that, they would do the famed pin test. You know what that means, the pin test? You open up any book of Talmud, and you take a pin, and you put it on any letter on any page of Talmud. And the pin test is where you have to say not just that letter, but all the other letters of, let's say, 100 pages in that whole book. What letters would this pin cut through if it was puncturing at that specific spot in the page? Think about the level of genius we're talking about. And there were legitimate students who knew this, who were able to do this. Rabbi Kreisworth is no longer with us, but I have an uncle, my father's sister's husband. He's a rabbi. He's the rabbi of Haifa. You can read him any sentence in all of Talmud. He'll tell you what book, what page, and what side of the page. And it's not a single question that you could ask him that he won't give you an answer instantaneously. But he couldn't hold a candle to the great geniuses in this Chachmei Lublin yeshiva. And Rabbi Wozner, teenager, he was a fine student, but he was not ranked amongst the greats, the precocious, prestigious greats of that institution. And he wanted to motivate himself to achieve greatness, to become a standout, an absolute standout. So he pretended that he was the chief rabbi of the city of Lodz. He pretended, or maybe he envisioned himself as a renowned halachist who knew all of Talmud, all the commentaries, a renowned sage to whom questions from all over the world were sent. No one was sending this teenager any questions, but he wrote the responses nonetheless. And he signed the name, Chief Rabbi of the city of Lodz. He envisioned what he could become, what he wanted to become. He saw the Menorah emblazoned upon the mountain. He had a picture of the greatness he wanted to achieve. And yes, all greatness demands aid from above. But you have to have a plan. You have to have a dream. This great sage, by the way, passed away at the age of 102. And there is a very famous set of books that he wrote, halachic responsa. 13 volumes, millions and millions of words. Questions indeed were sent to him from all over the world. He had a vision. He had a dream. He had a portrait of what he was looking to accomplish. He saw the menorah in the fire, projected atop the mountain. And with that image in place, he pursued the dream, the miracles needed to get there. It's the Tabernacle season. And we may read it as descriptions, dry, measurements, materials. But of course, it is absolutely pulsating with meaning and insight and profundity. We have ideas. Let's get to the dilemma of the Parsha podcast. There is a mitzvah, a commandment from God in our Parsha. Ve'asuli mikdash, build for me a sanctuary, build for me a tabernacle, build for me a temple, and I will dwell amongst you. One of the 613 mitzvos in the Torah is to build the temple. And here's the dilemma. Why don't we take our axes and our shovels and our implements and get to work? Why aren't we fulfilling this mitzvah? We are commanded to build a temple, a place where we can offer sacrifices, a place where there is an altar with an ever-present fire on top of it, a place where we can fulfill the pilgrimage thrice yearly. And we know where it's supposed to be. You can't build one in Houston. Well, you could, but you can't. You can't offer sacrifice. Only in Jerusalem, only in Temple Mount. There's a lot of Jews nearby. Why aren't they doing it? Are they mistaken? Should they? Should I go there? Should we go there? I think the simple answer as to why people aren't doing it is that they would all be jailed, if not lynched, if they tried. And maybe the rule is that you don't have to endanger yourself to fulfill this mitzvah. If it's dangerous and you don't have the ability to do it and stay a free man or stay living, well, maybe you're not obligated to do it. But there is one opinion amongst the great medieval sages. This is the opinion featured in the Sefer HaChinuch on mitzvah number 95, where he says that this mitzvah applies only when the majority of Israel, meaning of the nation, is on their land. If you have the majority of Israel outside the land, then this mitzvah does not apply. It's only when the nation, the majority of the nation, is in the land. Now, this is a very controversial opinion because it's not really well sourced in the Talmud and the Midrash, but also because the second temple, right, we're working on temple number 3. We have the tabernacle, that's a class of its own. We have the tabernacle in Shiloh and Nov and Givon, all these other places. But the first temple by Solomon, second temple really built by Ezra. We're waiting for the third temple. And there's a mitzvah to build it. Says the Sefer Chinuch, well, only when the majority of the nation is on their land. The second temple was built when the majority of the nation was in Babylon. It was built without the majority of the Jews on their land. So how can you say that there is this prerequisite? You can only build a temple, it's only a mitzvah to build a temple when the majority of the Jews are on their land. So some have suggested, well, second temple, that was the exception because we had prophets then. The prophet said they directed that behavior. They said, go build it. And that's why, even though the majority of Israel was not in the land, they still built it. Or alternatively, the majority of the nation on their land does not necessarily mean that the majority of Jews in the world live on the land. Rather, the majority of the land's inhabitants are Jewish. According to that definition, you take the inhabitants of the land and see, well, do we have 50% plus 1? By that understanding, well, today would qualify. Alternatively, there are sources that tell us that the third temple will not be built the way the first and the second temples were built. The first temple was built by Solomon, and it took 7 years, and there were hundreds of thousands of laborers. Second temple was also built with human labor. The third temple, that will be built in a miraculous fashion, according to some opinions. It will descend from heaven fully formed. Now, how does that happen? That only happens if there are sufficient merits in place. And therefore, we can suggest every time someone does a mitzvah, they're bringing the world closer to perfection. They're bringing the temple closer to fruition. They're doing their part, or a small part, in changing the calculus and making it a world that's deserving of a temple descending from heaven. And thus, we can even suggest every mitzvah that a person does, it's actually 2 mitzvahs. Mitzvah number 1, whatever the mitzvah is. Mitzvah number 2, they are fulfilling the mitzvah of building the temple, of contributing towards the building of the temple. But again, as we've seen throughout this podcast, you have to be worthy. If you think that you can witness a temple descending from heaven amidst the fire, well, you would have to also be worthy of witnessing the tabernacle and seeing the steamy bread, the showbread on the table. You have to be worthy of that. May we all be so fortunate as to witness the rebuilding of the temple, whether it's done from heaven or with human labor. Regardless of how it happens, we hope to be privy to that speedily in our days. It's a delightful time of the year. We begin a wonderful new part of the Torah, the tabernacle. And just reading about this and thinking about it will hopefully help effectuate it, bring it about, and change the world as a result. To intensify, to deepen that connection between heaven and earth, and to have that vitality from heaven just spill across the whole land and change the world and make the world very similar to heaven, to the way it's supposed to be, the way it was before Adam's sin, to create parity between this world and the world on high. May we witness that day. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day. Have a sensational rest of your week, and have a fabulous, stupendous, uplifting, inspiring, fruitful Shabbos upcoming. And please God, with the help of the Almighty, we'll gather together again from the Torch Center in Houston, Texas, next week for another installment of the Parsha podcast. And as always, my email address is, should you choose, should you want to send me an email, should you accept, this message will deconstruct, will explode. How's it go? In 5 seconds. Should you accept, you want to send me an email, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.